Hello, my name's Katie and I am here reading a brand new book in the series Storytime with Katie, where I read books for you because it is super helpful for me. Reading by myself is a lot harder than reading with accountability, and I know for some folks that's true for them too. And so why not give me a space to practice my reading skills and read books that I really love or have wanted to read for a long time, which is the case with Emergent Strategy, which I've read the intro about 5 times and haven't gotten past that. So if you want to join me, go ahead. I'll be reading this one chapter at a time, and I'll upload each one, part 1, part 2, part 3, not corresponding to the chapters, but corresponding to the order I read it. So the intro will be part 1. I'm not going to post these in a super consistent schedule. I'm just going to read them when I have time and capacity and feel like it, because I think that's how I do everything the best, when it's aligned with like my actual energy and desire and drive. So a little bit about me. I'm a neurodivergent coach in Portland, Oregon. I also run this co-working space that I like to jokingly say is for introverts, because it's 3 individual offices that lock and you get to wave to people in the hallway and then go, see you later. But yeah, besides that, I work with people who think outside the box and oftentimes need some support seeing themselves for who they really are, some compassion, some boundary setting help, things like that. But I tend to work with a lot of creatives and small business owners who are just really fantastic people who love leaning into creative practice to see what comes of it, and usually it's kind of magical. So without further ado, I'm going to dive into Emergent Strategy by Adrienne Maree Brown, and I'm going to do my best with all the name pronunciations and things like that, but please know I am human. I will probably make mistakes, and that's okay. I'll also probably be clearing my throat a lot, because that seems to be what happens when I read for extended periods, so bear with me. I have some peppermint tea, and I think we're ready to go. Okay. Emergent Strategy, Shaping Change, Changing Worlds, Adrienne Maree Brown. Let's see. I dedicate this book to the memory of Grace Lee Boggs. Excuse me. I just woke up, so my voice is still waking up with me. Who opened the door to emergence and pushed me through, who taught me to keep listening and learning and having conversations. She said, transform yourself to transform the world. I dedicate this book also to the memory of Charity Hicks, who saw all the interconnected patterns as clear as day. She said, wage love. This may only be a dream of mine, but I think it can be made real. Ella Baker. Introduction. First and foremost, thank you for opening this book. I hope you enjoy reading it as much as I have enjoyed living, learning, and gathering it. Wherever you are beginning this, take a deep breath and notice how you feel in your body and how the world around you feels. Okay, ready? Take a breath for the day you have had so far, and a breath for this precious moment which cannot be recreated. Now another for the day and night coming. Let's take another one. Big breath. Here you are in the cycle between the past and the future, choosing to spend your miraculous time in the exploration of how humans, especially those seeking to grow liberation and justice, can learn from the world around us and how to best collaborate, how to shape change. There are a lot of footnotes in this book, and I'm going to do my best to read them. So, first footnote, I've developed my ideas of shaping change in conversation with Octavia Butler's concept of shaping God, which is introduced in the Earthseed verses of her parable The Sower, New York, 4 Walls, 8 Windows, 1993. As I am gathering and writing this book, there is a trail of ants moving along the ceiling of my room and the sound of a small jungle coming in and out of the screened open windows, birds cawing, laughter, children's delight emerging from that, then tears. A car backfires and I flinch. A lizard peeks at me from the door. It's been raining for a few days and the air feels thick. I feel good. I've been meditating, picking up my yoga practice, biking the 2 miles to the beach when the sun comes out. Something is injured in my knee, but I'm feeling alive against my limits. I came to this edge of Mexico to pull a book together because a few years ago it was here, near this tiny portion of the massive ocean, that I began to realize how important emergent strategy for building complex patterns and systems of change through relatively small interactions, is to me. The potential scale of transformation that could come from movements intentionally practicing this adaptive relational way of being, on our own and with others. The waves drifting toward me and then away from the shore, seabirds of all kinds flocking over the salty blue, pelicans dropping down and scooping schools of tiny fish into their big mouths. Diving under the moving surface to see how everything humans leave in the water is repurposed as an ecosystem. Laying in a hammock and watching mosquito mamas approach me, waiting for my attention to wander so they can feed on my blood. I love the scene at the end of The Matrix where Neo sees everything in green on black code. Emergent strategy is a way that all of us can begin to see the world in life code, awakening us to the sacred systems of life all around us. Many of us have been and are becoming students of these systems of life, wondering if, in fact, we can unlock some crucial understanding about our own humanity if we pay closer attention to this place we are from, the bodies we're in. The world is full of beauty, magic, miracles, and patterns that induce wonder. This book is a collection of essays, speeches, spells, interviews, conversations, tools, profiles, and poems sharing my learning process in the face of that wonder. You're basically holding a book of me saying, wow, everything is so amazing, or that's not wow. Why not go with the wow option? Emergence is one of the best concepts I have learned for discussing this wow, this wonder. Emergence is the way complex systems and patterns arise out of a multiplicity of relatively simple interactions. It is another way of speaking about the connective tissue of all that exists. The way, the Tao, the force, change, God, goddess, life, birds flocking, cells splitting, fungi whispering underground. Emergence emphasizes critical connections over critical mass, building authentic relationships, listening with all the senses of the body and the mind. With our human gift of reasoning, we have tried to control or overcome the emergent processes that are our own nature, the process of this planet we live on, and the universe we call home. The result is crisis at each scale we are aware of, from our deepest inner moral sensibilities to the collective scale of climate and planetary health and beyond, to our species in relation to space and time. The crisis is everywhere, massive, 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 and we are small. But emergence notices the way small actions and connections create complex systems, patterns, and become ecosystems in societies. Emergence is our inheritance as a part of this universe. It is how we change. Emergent strategy is how we intentionally change in ways that grow our capacity to embody the just and liberated worlds we long for. A few words on what this book is and is not. I am offering this content as a cluster of thoughts in development, observations of existing patterns, and questions of how we apply the brilliance of the world around us to our efforts to coexist in and with this world as humans, particularly for those of us seeking to transform the crises of our time to turn our legacy towards harmony. This book is for people who want to radically change the world, to apply natural order and our love of life to the ways we create the next world, to tap into the most ancient systems and patterns for wisdom as we build tomorrow. This book is not one that will teach you all about hard science, as I am not a scientist. As Octavia Butler said, I would never have been a good scientist. My attention span was too short for that. My style is more, oh, wow, how? Than empirical data proves that. I'm writing this book primarily for other people like myself who crinkle our brows and lean away when someone starts speaking math, who fall asleep almost immediately when attempting to read nonfiction, but who get spun into wonder about the natural world and want to know things, who feel and know more than we can say or explain and want to know how knowing those things can transform the ways we approach changing the world. I'm sure there are science people who could write a contrarian book to anything in here. Footnote. Oh shoot, I'm missing footnotes. Okay, I'm gonna catch up on my footnotes. I got caught up in the story. I missed one back here. Okay. So footnote 2, they mentioned Nick Obolensky, complex adaptive leadership, embracing paradox and uncertainty. Footnote 3, radical simply means grasping things at the root, Angela Davis. Let All Things Rise Together, address, Spelman College, reprinted in Women, Culture and Politics, New York, Random House, 1989. And then footnote 4 is where we're at. If that's you, then yay, I bet you're hella smart. Help get us all free. Okay. Whew. This is going to be a learning curve for me to read with the footnotes. Okay. I'm sure there are science people who could write a contrarian book to anything in here. So to that they say, if that's you, then yay. I bet you're hella smart. Help us get us all free. Okay. The natural world actually supports any worldview, competitive, powerless, isolationist, violent. For instance, humans so far have generally deified and aligned with the king of the jungle or forest, lions, tigers, bears, and yet so many of these creatures, for all their isolated ferocity and alpha power, are going extinct. While a major cause of that extinction is our human impact, there is something to be said for adaptation, the adaptation of small collaborative species. Roaches and ants and deer and fungi and bacteria and viruses and bamboo and eucalyptus and squirrels and vultures and mice and mosquitoes and dandelions and so many more collaborative life forms continue to proliferate, survive, grow, sustain. I want to understand how we humans do that, how we earn a place on this precious planet, get in the right relationship with it. Okay, footnote. The mountains, streams, valleys, oceans, deserts, and all things are related to our thoughts and actions. All things are in relationship with each other. Jasmine Wallace, the Tbilisi Cherokee Medicine Woman. And then there's a website to certifiednaturallygrown.org/producers/41666. So, I am focusing on the ways creatures and ecosystems function together in and with the natural world. I am open to critiques, of course, if they are offered in the spirit of collective liberation. Staying focused on our foundational miraculous nature is actually very hard work in our modern culture of deconstruction. We are socialized to see what is wrong, missing, off, or tear down the ideas of others and uplift our own. To a certain degree, our entire future may depend on learning to listen without assumptions or defenses. So I am open to hearing what doesn't work about this book, as long as you promise to stay open to what does work. We all learn differently, and this book favors those who learn like me, through inspiration, through late-night conversations, personal revelations, experience, and reflection. I hope it will inspire and engage your interest in complex sciences and in being of a miraculous world. Here's a quote. Exercise your human mind as fully as possible, knowing it is only an exercise. Build beautiful artifacts, solve problems, explore the secrets of the physical universe. Savor the input from all the senses, feel the joy and sorrow, the laughter, the empathy, compassion, and tote the emotional memory in your travel bag. Ryan Power, Waking Life. This is not a book to displace all the strategic processes in play in social justice movements or to discount the work that has happened up until now, There have been effective movements towards justice and liberation throughout the history of human existence. I am thrilled by how humans have continually stood up against our own weaknesses. I think throughout history we have done our best given what we knew, and we will continue to do so. I also know that there are so many brilliant strategists out there who turn data into action and policy, and I respect that work. I see this offering as a noticing that can shape our next steps, as more water joining the river, and as a way to get aware of what we have learned so far so that we can move forward from there instead of repeating lessons we have already learned. While my default position is wonder, I am not without critique, disappointment, frustration, and even depression when I contemplate humanity, especially our social justice movements where my expectations are foolishly higher. I promise to be honest about the ways that those aspects of personal movement crisis show up in my longing and searching for other ways of being. Octavia Butler, one of the cornerstones of my awareness of emergent strategy, spoke of the fatal human flaw as a combination of hierarchy and intelligence. Footnote 6. Octavia Butler, Dawn, New York, Grand Central Publishing, 1987. We are brilliant at survival, but brutal at it. We tend to slip out of togetherness the way we slip out of the womb, bloody and messy and surprised to be alone. And clever, able to learn with our whole bodies the ways of the world. My hope is that this content will deepen and soften that intelligence such that we can align our behavior, our structures, and our movements with our visions of justice and liberation, and give those of us creating the future more options for working with each other and embodying the things we fight for: dignity, collective power, love, generative conflict, and community. I will be satisfied if this book sparks conversations, new practices, and projects where people keep noticing, observing, and learning about emergence and liberation. If people see their experimental work affirmed by this content, and if I hear of people's self and collective transformation journeys related to emergent strategy, whether people use that exact terminology or not, I hope it is part of our revolutionary journey. I hope that this book is clear enough that people feel free to play with all of these observations and their own, add to it, discard what doesn't serve, and keep innovating. I don't want to be the owner of this, just a joyful conduit. Throughout the book, I weave together thoughts and theories I have learned in the past decades of study and obsession with original content, tools, spells, poems, examples, lists, assessments, everything I can think of that could be helpful for those interested in this work. As I was finishing the book, it felt like it was missing something. I realized that it was because the way I have... Now I'm anxious about missing the footnotes. As I was finishing this book, it felt like it was missing something. I realized that it was because the way I have learned about emergent strategy is in conversation with others, so I asked a bunch of people I consider to be teachers in my life to get in conversation with me. And as the words poured in poems and quotes and stories and testimonials, all of a sudden the book became really alive and exciting to me. It also grew to nearly 500 pages. I slowed down and started weaving and listening. Now you get to hear from a variety of people who are doing emergent strategy work in their own words in hybrid interview conversations and love stories and moments of wow. Some of this content is in these pages, and some of it is on the Emergent Strategy Ideation Institute site. The book can be engaged non-linearly. There is an assessment section. Oh, I did miss this footnote. Okay. Footnote 7, Emergent Strategy Ideation Institute's website can be found http://www.alliedmedia.org/ESII. Okay. This book can be engaged non-linearly. There is an assessment section. You can start there and let that determine where you dive in. You can just go straight to the tools at the end and start facilitating and experimenting with them, or you can start with a review of the principles and elements of emergent strategy, which are in conversation with each other and can stand alone or cluster. You can read the book with others, assess each other, and assess the groups and circles you move in, come up with new words and new observations for all of this. Notice how it connects and echoes other theoretical frameworks. Underline everything that moves you and then give it to someone younger than you. Come up with workshops and retreats around this work. Take it, run, go, grow, innovate, emerge. You can also just like the idea of the book. I often like an idea that I don't have time or attention to fully engage. I won't be mad. I believe we are all actually already aware of these things. We just have the volume turned down. May this serve as a turn up of our awareness of our place in the miraculous. There are a million paths into the future, and many of them can be transformative for the whole. Okay. The beginning of my session. We have lived through a good half century of individualistic linear organizing led by charismatic individuals or budget-building institutions, which intends to reform or revolutionize society but falls back into modeling the oppressive tendencies against which we claim to be pushing. Some of those tendencies are seeking to assert one right way or one right strategy. Many align with the capitalistic belief that constant growth and critical mass is the only way to create change, even if they don't use that language. There are new strategies emerging or being remembered. Many would describe this as a shift from a masculine to feminine or patriarchal to feminist leadership. I see that, and I think it is also about something beyond all of our binaries, evolving in relationship with our hierarchical tendency. At this point in my life, I am not against hierarchy. I notice hierarchies in my life and attention all the time, inside my own preferences for whom I spend my waking hours with and how I like to spend my time. I also deeply value experience and natural affinity for things. I'm oriented toward healing and not math, so I don't offer myself up to create budgets for people. I follow other people's leadership around math. I offer leadership around healing, which comes more naturally to me. That give and take creates room for micro-hierarchies and a collaborative environment. One of my favorite questions today is, how do we turn our collective full-bodied intelligence toward collaboration if that is the way we will survive? My favorite life forms right now are dandelions and mushrooms. The resilience in these structures, which we think of as weeds and fungi, the incomprehensible scale, the clarity of identity excites me. I love to see the way mushrooms can take substances we think of as toxic and process them as food, or the dandelions spread not only themselves but their community structure, manifesting their essential qualities, which include healing and detoxifying the human body to proliferate and thrive in a new environment. The resilience of these life forms is that they evolve while maintaining core practices that ensure their survival. A mushroom is a toxin transformer. A dandelion is a community of healers waiting to spread. What are we as humans? What is our function in the universe? One thing I have observed, when we are engaged in acts of love, we humans are at our best and most resilient. The love in romance that makes us want to be better people. The love of children that makes us change our whole lives to meet their needs. The love of family that makes us drop everything to take care of them. The love of community that makes us work tirelessly with broken hearts. Perhaps humans' core function is love. Love leads us to observe in a much deeper way than any other emotion. I think of how delightful it is to see something new in my lovers' faces, something they may only know from inside as a feeling. If love were the central practice of a new generation of organizers and spiritual leaders, it would have a massive impact on what we consider organizing. If the goal is to increase the love rather than winning or dominating a constant opponent, I think we could actually imagine liberation from constant oppression. We would suddenly be seeing everything we do, everyone we meet, not through the tactical eyes of war, but through eyes of love. We would see that there's no such thing as a blank canvas, an empty land, or a new idea, but everywhere there's a complex, ancient, fertile ground full of potential. We would organize from the perspective that there is wisdom and experience and amazing story in the communities we love, and instead of starting up new ideas, organizations all the time, we would want to listen, support, collaborate, merge, and grow through fusion, not competition. We would understand that the strength of our movement is in the strength of our relationships, which could only be measured by their depth. Scaling up would mean going deeper, being more vulnerable and more empathetic. What does depth require from us, from me? In my longing for depth, I have been rerouting in the earth, in myself and my creativity, in my community, and my spiritual practices, honing in on work that is not only meaningful but feels joyful, listening with less and less judgment to the ideas and efforts of others, having visions that are long-term. Another part of walking this path has been the practice of humility. Enough humility to learn, to be taught, to have teachers. As a military brat, I've always rebelled against anyone I perceived as an authority. It's been hard and rewarding work to relinquish some of that resistance in order to let wisdom in. The Sufi poet Hafiz says, "How do I listen to others? As if everyone were my teacher, speaking to me, her cherished last words." Footnote 8. Hafiz Hazif. I feel like it's Hafiz. The Gift. Poems by Hafiz, the great Sufi master, translated by Daniel Ladinsky, New York, Penguin Books, 1999. I am listening now with all of my senses, as if the whole universe might exist just to teach me more about love. I listen to strangers, I listen to random invitations, I listen to criticisms, I listen to my body, I listen to my creativity and to the artists who inspire me. I listen to elders, I listen to my dreams and the books I'm reading. I notice that the more I pay attention, the more I see order, clear messages, patterns, and invitations in the small or seemingly random things that happen in my life. In all these ways, I meditate on love. This practice lets me connect to the part of myself that is divine, aligned with the universe, and the place within myself where I can be a conduit for spiritual truth. I don't know what else to call it. What comes forth as lessons and realizations and beliefs doesn't feel political or even about organizing. It feels like spirit leading me to the truth. Things like, the less I engage in gossip, the less I harbor suspicion, the more space I find within myself for miraculous experiences. When I fear the universe, I fear myself. When I love and am in awe of the universe, I love and am in awe of myself. Footnote 9. Though I wrote this before the Queen released her album, I would be pleased if you thought I was referring to the lyric, "God love herself" from Don't Hurt Yourself on Beyonce's masterpiece Lemonade. Imagine then the power when I align with the universe. Nothing is required of me more than being and creating, simultaneously being present with who I am, who we are as a species, and creating who we must become, and within that, who I must become. When these truths come to me, it reminds me of how so many past leaders have humbled themselves or been forced through prison sentences, exile, or other punitive measures to live simple lives, spending time in prayer and meditation and reflection. It reminds me that they all seem to have this solid core of truth within themselves that cannot be shaken by external pressures. Those truths resonate with me when I read or hear about them, even without the context of their whole spiritual journey. But I know that to truly understand, to truly be able to transform myself and develop that own unflappable core, I cannot vicariously live their spiritual lessons. I must walk my own path. Our generation must walk the spiritual path that is available to us only in this time, with its own unique combination of wisdom and creation. I think there are many ways to find that simple path within ourselves, and I think that those of us who wish to see A truly radically different world must demand of ourselves the possibility that we are called to lead not from right to left or from minority to majority, but from spirit toward liberation. So I suppose it is time to come out as a spiritual leader in my own way, which means everyone is my teacher. You weren't starving before you got here, you were born full. Johnny Nicholas. To write this book, I have had to get intimate with what I don't know, with my fears and doubts, with my restlessness. I was very young the first time I felt this restlessness, the sense of how things are isn't right, isn't enough, is empty even. Even as a child, this sense made me nauseous, like dancing around a black hole, praying it is a portal and not a nothingness. As I got older, I understand that it is the unknown, and it is where the most exciting parts of life happen. This is my leap into the unknown. What is emergent strategy? Tea break. What is emergent strategy? Emergence is the way complex systems and patterns arise out of a multiplicity of relatively simple interactions. I will repeat these words from Nick Obolensky throughout this book because they are the clearest articulation of emergence that I have come across. In the framework of emergence, the whole is a mirror of the parts. Existence is fractal. The health of the cell is the health of the species and the planet. There are examples of emergence everywhere. Birds don't make a plan to migrate, raising resources to fund their way, packing for scarce times, mapping out their pit stops. They feel a call in their bodies that they must go, and they follow it, responding to each other, each bringing their adaptations. There is an art to flocking, staying separate enough not to crowd each other, aligned enough to maintain a shared direction, and cohesive enough to always move toward each other, responding to destiny together. Destiny is a calling that creates a beautiful journey. Emergence is beyond what the sum of its parts could imagine. A group of caterpillars or nymphs might not see flight in their future, but it's inevitable. It's destiny. Oak trees don't set an intention to listen to each other better or agree to hold tight to each other when the next storm comes. Under the earth, always, they reach for each other. They grow such that their roots are intertwined and create a system of strength that is resilient on a sunny day as it is in a hurricane. Dandelions don't know whether they are a weed or a brilliance, but each seed can create a field of dandelions. We are invited to be that prolific and to return fertility to the soil around us. Cells may not know civilization is possible. They don't amass as many units as they can sign up to be the same. No, they grow until they split, complexify, then they interact and intersect and discover their purpose. I am a lung cell, I am a tongue cell, and they serve it, and they die. And what emerges from these cycles are complex organisms, systems, movements, and societies. Nothing is wasted or a failure. Emergence is a system that makes us use of everything in the iterative process. It's all data. Octavia Butler said civilization is to groups what intelligence is to individuals. I'm going to read that again. Octavia Butler said civilization is to groups what intelligence is to individuals. It is a means of combining the intelligence of many to achieve ongoing group adaptation. Footnote 10. Octavia Butler, Parable of the Sower. She also said, all that you touch, you change. All that you change, changes you. Ebed. We are constantly impacting and changing our civilization, each other, ourselves, intimate strangers, and we are working to transform a world that is, by its very nature, in a constant state of change. Janine Benyus, a student of biomimicry, says, nature, life, would always create conditions conducive to life. Footnote, Janine M. Benyus biomimicry, innovation inspired by nature. She tells of a radical fringe of scientists who are realizing that natural selection isn't individual but mutual, that species only survive if they learn to be in community. How can we, future ancestors, align ourselves with the most resilient practices of emergence as a species? Many of us have been socialized to understand that constant growth, violent competition, and critical mass are the ways to create change. But emergence shows us that adaptation and evolution depend more upon critical, deep, and authentic connections, a thread that can be tugged for support and resilience. The quality of connection between the nodes in the patterns, dare I say love. And we know how to connect, we long for it. Okay, this is going to be kind of hard to read, so I'll show you this first. Hopefully you can see that. It says Octavia Butler, and I'm just going to read the left side first and then the right. All successful life is adaptable, opportunistic, tenacious, interconnected, and fecund. Understand this, use it, shape God. So on the right it says fractal, adaptive, nonlinear, iterative, resilient, transformative justice, interdependent, decentralized, creates more possibilities, scholarship, reflection, practice, experiment, intention. Together we must move like waves. Have you observed the ocean? The waves are not the same over and over. Each one is unique and responsive. The goal is not to repeat each other's motion, but to respond in whatever way feels right in your body. The waves we create are both continuous and a one-time occurrence. We must notice what it takes to respond well, how it feels to be in a body, in a whole, separate, aligned, cohesive, critically connected. I would call our work to change the world science-fictional behavior, being concerned with the way our actions and beliefs now, today, will shape the future, tomorrow, the next generations. We are excited by what we can create. We believe it is possible to create the next world. We believe. For me, this might be because I was born to a Trekkie, meaning one who watches Star Trek, obsessively. My dad watched Star Trek in a way that seems logical to me now. He watched this post-racist narrative as black man from the Deep South bringing multiracial children into a racist world, eyes wide, faith bubbling up. We all watched it together as his military career took our family from place to place. My parents intentionally took us away from the United States for our early years, and I think they believed that by the time we came back here, things would have changed on the race front. That didn't happen, and the time came to return to the U.S. My father was stationed in Georgia. I think what I experienced there, the casual and constant presence of white supremacy, the knee-jerk assessment of my intelligence and humanity, is one of the foundational catalysts for my study of sci-fi, apocalypse and post-apocalypse, emergence and complexity. I thought then, and I think now, this can't be all. No one survives this way, not long term. This can't be the purpose of our species, to constantly identify each other as other, build walls between us, and engage in both formal and informal wars against each other's bodies. I felt and feel miraculous. It's confusing to feel so miraculous when so many people hate my skin and my history. I see the miraculous in others, even those who hate me have heartbeats, and I generally assume have people they love. Why can't they love me? Should I love them anyway? How can I hold these massive contradictions? I started reading sci-fi obsessively, looking for options, for other worlds where I wasn't dismissed as an idealist or an inferior. On that path, I discovered Octavia Butler. Decades before my birth, she was working these same edges in her heart, pendulum swinging between curiosity, possibility, and hopelessness. Because if we can't articulate more viable futures and adapt, our human future is pretty hopeless. Octavia wrote novels with young black women protagonists meeting aliens, surviving apocalypse, even evolving into vampires, becoming telepathic networks, time traveling to reckon with slave-owning ancestors. Woven throughout her work are two things. One, a coherent visionary exploration of humanity, and two, emergent strategies for being better humans. A visionary exploration of humanity includes imagination. Octavia spent her life working through complex ideas of the future on behalf of humans. As long as we operate in time the way we currently do, remembering the past, observing and acting in the present, and moving in and out of rereading that. As long as we operate in time the way we currently do, remembering the past, observing and acting in the present, imagining the future, there will be divergent paths that are moving in and out of alignment, in and out of conflict. Imagination is shaped by our entire life experience, our socialization, the concepts we are exposed to, where we fall in the global hierarchies of society. Our ideas of right and wrong shift with time. Right now it's clear to me that something is wrong if it hurts this planet, but if we don't claim the future, that sense of loyalty to the earth of environmentalism could be outdated. Kenny Bailey, footnote, Kenny Bailey is one of the founders of the Design Studio for Innovation, a Boston-based artistic research and development outfit that serves civil society. Kenny Bailey helped me to understand this, that justice, rights, things we take for granted are not permanent. Once there were kings and queens all over the earth. Someday we might speak of presidents and CEOs only in past tense. It is so important that we fight for the future, get into the game, get dirty, get experimental. How do we create that and proliferate a compelling vision of economies and ecologies that center humans in the natural world over the accumulation of material? We embody, we learn, we release the idea of failure because it's all data. But first we imagine. We are in an imagination battle. Footnote 14. The goddess writer Claudia Rankine, author of the award-winning book Citizen, and Terry Marshall of Intelligent Mischief, a creative, intelligent design lab, each speak of this in different ways in their work. They have both inspired me and transformed my understanding of the importance of creative work. We are in an imagination battle. Trayvon Martin and Mike Brown and Renisha McBride and so many others are dead because in some white imagination they were dangerous. And that imagination is so respected that those who killed based on an imagined racialized fear of black people are rarely held accountable. Imagination has people thinking they can go from being poor to a millionaire as part of a shared American dream. Imagination turns brown bombers into terrorists and white bombers into mentally ill victims. Imagination gives us borders, gives us superiority, gives us race as an indicator of capability. I often feel I am trapped inside someone else's imagination, and I must engage my own imagination in order to break free. All of this imagining in the poverty of our current system is heightened because of scarcity economics. There isn't enough, so we need to hoard, enclose, divide, fence up, and prioritize resources and people. We have to imagine beyond those fears. We have to ideate, imagine, and conceive together. We must imagine new worlds that transition ideologies and norms so that no one sees black people as murderers or brown people as terrorists and aliens, but all of us as potential cultural and economic innovators. This is a time travel exercise for the heart. This is collaborative ideation. What are the ideas that will liberate all of us? The more people that collaborate on that ideation, the more that people will be served by the resulting worlds. Science fiction is simply a way to practice the future together. I suspect that that is what many of you are up to, practicing futures together, practicing justice together, living into new stories. It is our right and responsibility to create a new world. What we pay attention to grows, so I'm thinking about how we grow what we are all imagining and creating into something large enough and solid enough that it becomes a tipping point. Ursula Le Guin recently said, "It's up to authors to spark the imagination of their readers and to help them envision alternatives to how we live." Footnote 15 from the November 2014 acceptance speech for the National Book Foundation's Medal for Distinguished Contribution to American Letters. I agree with her. As Tony Cade Bambara has taught us, we must make just and liberated futures irresistible. Footnote 16 from Interview with Kay Bonetti, 1982. We are all the protagonists of what might be called the Great Turning, the change, the new economy, the new world. And I think it is in healing behavior to look at something so broken and see the possibility and wholeness in it. That's how I work as a healer. When a body is between my hands, I let wholeness pour through it. We are all healers too. We are creating possibilities because we are seeing a future full of wholeness. I suspect this is in part because we are practicing emergent strategies. My mentor, Grace Lee Boggs, first raised the concept of emergence with us in Detroit after reading Margaret Wheatley's work about biomimicry and mycelium magic. Footnote 17, Margaret Wheatley, Leadership in the New Science. Oakland, Barrett Kohler, Publishers, 1992. Grace started asking us what our movements would look like if we focused on critical connections instead of critical mass. We need each other. I love the idea of shifting from mile-wide, inch-deep movements to inch-wide, mile-deep movements. That schism the existing paradigm. Footnote 18. I first experienced this inch-wide, mile-deep language when it was used to speak about the work of the Detroit Future Youth Program at Allied Media Projects. I've since heard it used to speak of work that prioritizes depth and community organizing and understands that meaningful skill depends on deep transformative work rather than surface, widespread work. Now I've said it. Now I've said what emergence is. Strategy is a military term, simply meaning a plan of action toward a goal. Footnote 19. Confession. As the first daughter of a colonel in the U.S. Army, I cut my political teeth in conversation with my father, who served as the chief of war plans when I was in college. In our movements for social change and in every other space I've ever been in, we generally use the word strategy in a positive sense. We say, "Oh wow, he's so strategic." And we mean that this person is smart, calculating, practical, a winner. But the word is actually not that discerning. Horrible, racist, sexist, ableist, patriarchal, outdated, inflexible plans can be pitched as strategic. We must be more precise. Emergent strategies are ways for humans to practice complexity and grow the future through relatively simple interactions. This juxtaposition of emergence and strategy was what made the most sense to me when I was trying to explain the kind of leadership I see in Octavia's books. It isn't just that her protagonists are Black, female, or young leaders, or maybe it is because of all those things. Who leads matters. But what I noticed is that her leaders are adaptive, riding change like dolphins ride the ocean, adaptive but also intentional, like migrating birds who know how to get where they're going even when a storm pushes them 100 miles off course. Humans, some of us are surviving, following, flocking, but some of us are trying to imagine where we are going as we fly. That is radical imagination. Octavia's protagonists were also interdependent, often polyamorous. I suspect that Octavia understood from her own feelings of loneliness, desire, and pleasure that the personal is political, and that pleasure evokes change, perhaps more than shame. More precisely, where shame makes us freeze and try to get really small and invisible, pleasure invites us to move, to open, to grow. At this point, we have all the information we need to create a change. It isn't a matter of facts. It's a matter of longing, having the will to change and implement something else. We are living in the ancestral imagination of others, with their longing for safety and abundance, a longing that didn't include us, or included us as enemy, fright, other. Octavia played with what emerged from a Black woman or girl, what longings, pleasure, what communities and connections, what philosophies and divinities. The strategies that played out in Octavia's books included adaptability and interdependence, often through the practice of repeated vulnerability. Right now, there is an organization called Black Organizing for Leadership and Dignity, BOLD, which is cultivating a safe space for Black leaders to practice being vulnerable, being in mutual support, with the goal of countering the usual model of leader isolation. Footnote 20. BOLD is a national leadership training program designed to help rebuild Black, African American, Caribbean, African, Afro-Latino social justice infrastructure in order to organize Black communities more effectively and to recenter Black leadership in the U.S. social justice movement. More information available at www.boldblackorganizing.org. We all need a place where we can weep and be held and feel our feelings and figure out how those feelings can direct our next evolution. I am now part of the training team for BOLD, and I can honestly say that after a period of movement, heartbreak, and disillusionment, the focus on love and relationship at BOLD is what brought me back to justified and tangible hope. Opening up inside me the generosity of time and gifts that is necessary for movements to grow. I want to be part of movement again because it is a pleasure to be in the Black spaces that BOLD was creating. What amazes me is that in the space of such constant Black trauma, we get together and celebrate and love on each other. We laugh and find the pleasure of community, of interdependence. It feels good together. Octavia's leaders were also decentralized, and they were generative. Resilience and solutions came from that decentralization. The collective response was possible because no one person held the power. Ferguson, Baltimore, Minneapolis, Chicago show us the power of individuals willing to act without a single leader, and their leaderful examples are inspiring others to stand up in real time, offline and online, to change legislation and perception. Octavia was concerned with scale, understanding that what happens at the interpersonal level is a way to understand the whole of society. In many of her books, she shows us how radical ideas spread through conversation, questions, one-to-one interactions. Social movements right now are also fractal, practicing at a small scale that we most want to see at the universal level. No more growth or scaling up before actually learning through experience. Rather than narrowing into one path forward, Octavia's leaders were creating more and more possibilities. Not one perfect path forward, but an abundance of futures, of ways to manage resources together, to be brilliant together. In trying to place Octavia into a context that non-sci-fi people could understand, I kept finding resonance in emergence and complex sciences, the ideas that Grace had brought onto my radar. I started to pay more attention to the magic of the world, the small collective creatures who were humble and abundant and resilient. And now I have become obsessed with how we can be movements like flocks of birds, underground power like whispering mushrooms, and the seashell representation of a garlic vision of a galactic vision for justice. Maybe garlic too. Small patterns that avoid useless predation, spread lessons, and proliferate change. Emergent strategies let us practice in every possible way the world we want to see. Okay. But what exactly is emergent strategy? Emergent strategy was initially a way of describing the adaptive and relational leadership model found in the work of Black science fiction writer Octavia Butler and others. Then it grew into plans of action, personal practices, and collective organizing tools that account for constant change and rely on the strength of relationships for adaptation, with a crush on biomimicry and permaculture. Biomimetics, or biomimicry, is the imitation of the models, systems, and elements of nature for the purpose of solving complex human problems. Permaculture is a system of agricultural and social design principles centered around simulating or directly utilizing the patterns and features observed in natural ecosystems. Oh, I love both these things so much. Which evolved into strategies for organizers building movements for social justice and liberation that leverage relatively simple interactions to create complex pattern systems and transformations, including adaptation, interdependence, and decentralization, fractal awareness, resilience, and transformative justice, nonlinear and iterative change, creating more possibilities. And now it's like ways for humans to practice being in right relationship to our home and each other, to practice complexity and grow a compelling future together through relatively simple interactions. Emergent strategy is how we intentionally change in ways that grow our capacity to embody the just and liberated worlds we long for. And maybe, if I'm honest, it's a philosophy for how to be in harmony and love in and with the world. A complex movement. It's hard to describe like how this book is written. We went from bullet points to like a poem back to book novel form. Okay, a complex movement. Over and over again, it becomes known the peace we seek is seeking us, the joy a full bud awaiting our attention, justice in our hands, longing to be practiced, the whole world learning from within, this thrilling moat in the universe, laboratory, labyrinth, internalized demands, you are the one. You are waiting for to externalize love, bind us together into a greater self, a complex movement, a generative abundance, an embodied evolution. Learn to be here. Critique is a seductress. Her door is always open. So what if you get some? We are going further, past your form, to wonder. This requires comprehension that cannot fit in words, out beyond our children, beyond the end of time. There is a ceaseless cycle, a fractal sublime, and we come to create it, to soil our hands and faces, loving, loving, and loving ourselves in all our places. Lineage of emergent strategy. Lineage is both important for me to name and impossible to track. I've come across these concepts in so many ways and places, primarily in the natural world, in my own body, in the development of my nibblings. Footnote 21, yes, a gender-neutral term for the children of my siblings, learned from Chicago-based healer writer Tanuja Jagernoff, pardon the mispronunciation. In movements, including the movement for Black Lives and Occupy, in stories of how my paternal grandmother survived and created life in Pendleton, South Carolina, and stories of how my ancestors survived slavery. Every time I have worked with indigenous communities that have been able to sustain their cultural practices through the onslaught of colonialism and imperialism, as I listen, I hear emergent strategies, being in right relationship with the natural world, learning from the ways change and resilience happens throughout this entire interconnected complex system. Some Indigenous and First Nations friends and teachers have patiently listened to my discoveries around being humble in the face of the unknown, listening closely to all that is within and beyond our human ways of knowing, honoring the changes that come through longing, and honoring the very small things that create the largest shifts in the world. I am the first child of two people who create a large shift for themselves from small actions of love weighted with the context of their time, a Black man and a white woman, finding lifelong, life-changing commitment in the context of white supremacy and racism, external and internal. And it was quick, a noticing each other, a flirting without words, talking, laughing, and 4 months later, eloping. I showed up a year and a half later. Love overcame racist socialization, creating more possibilities between two people who had been taught the other was dangerous. After family, there is a certain convergence of thinkers and conversations that has sharpened this particular set of concepts into something I could name and share. Most of this particular lineage happened on worn-down couches and over kitchen tables in Detroit from 2008 to 2014. In 1992, Margaret Wheatley published a book called Leadership and the New Science based on her work with organizations and leaders on what is effective through a lens of quantum physics, biology, and chaos theory. Her key learnings were that everything is about relationships, critical connections. Chaos is an essential process that we need to engage. The sharing of information is fundamental for organizational success. And vision is an invisible field that binds us together, emerging from relationships and chaos and information. Excuse me. Wheatley has continued developing her thinking on how transformation happens, how communities learn and evolve. She's published a series of books in which she explores and shares her learning, including how we listen to each other and what communities around the world are doing to generate life, to generate cooperation and future together. When we met and worked together on a gathering of organizers in Detroit, I got the sense that she's a little over leadership, so I encourage you to read it for the references. It is a foundational text, and then read everything else she is working on. Grace Lee Boggs, Detroit-based American revolutionary, my late mentor and friend, read Leadership and began to incorporate some of the ideas into speeches and her own writing in the last decade of her 100-day life. As a thinker, I would say Grace was a voracious, efficient beast, and philosophy was her hunting ground. She stayed curious and relevant until the end, asking metaphysical questions on her deathbed, and she was usually ahead of her time. She was creating visionary fiction with Bunyan Bryant in the 1970s. Footnote 22. Visionary fiction is a term coined by Octavia's Brood Science Fiction from Social Justice Movements co-editor Walida and Maree to describe the work of people who use fiction to advance justice and liberation. During the years of our relationship and friendship, Grace would sit in her armchair and encourage everyone who came through her doors to develop as an organic intellectual who could take these concepts into daily life and community work. Grace taught me dialectal humanism, the cycle of collective transformation of beliefs that occurs as we gather new information and experiences, meaning that over time, we can understand and hold a position we previously believed to be wrong. Footnote 23, organic intellectuals comes from Antonio Gramsci and refers to intellectuals outside of traditional academic institutions, intellectuals who develop organically and counter relationship to the dominant culture. For more on Grace's concept of dialectal humanism and its relationship to Karl Marx's dialectal materialism, see the Boggs Center website at www.boggscenter.org. Okay. In Grace's work, that cycle of transformation was foundational, something to cultivate in young people, in communities. In addition, she resonated with Wheatley's ideas that critical connections are more important in a long-term transformation process than critical mass. Relationships are everything. Invincible/Ill Weaver, a Detroit-based artist organizer, heard about the book and concepts from Grace and became a student of Emergence, naming their music and media work after the concept and generating an award-winning multimedia interactive album project called Complex Movements. Footnote 24. Invincible should write a book about emergence. They do much more rigorous research on the science of things than I seem capable of. For more about the amazing work of complex movements, check out emergencemedia.org/pages/complex movements. Okay. Around these and other concepts at the intersection of complex science and social justice. I was reading Black science fiction writer Octavia Butler's work over and over during that time. I was also visiting and eventually moving to Detroit, in large part due to my relationship with Ill. As I've mentioned, I was looking for language and frameworks to use when exploring the kind of leadership Butler's protagonists practiced, and found them in conversations with Ill and Grace about emergence, interdependence, iteration, being in relationship, and constantly changing conditions, fractals. Emergence, particularly as it applies to change, was a thrilling match. Ill and I have a work soulmateship. They are family, a chosen sibling, an idea confidant. Detroit's movement and art scenes are actually a complex network of such familial relationships cultivated through sharing resources, loving the city, and conversing as we learn together. I am a nomad who also feels rooted here because of this network. Wheatley's work speaks of relationship. The depth of relationship between the individuals and a system determines the strength of the system. Butler, Wheatley, Ill, Grace, myself, and many others have been growing a strong system of relationships for considering emergence as a game-changing approach to movement work. Okay, but who are you? Right, I'm Adrienne Maree Brown. I'm an auntie, sister, daughter, whoa. Footnote, I learned whoa from the artist rapper Drake, and I'm deeply grateful for it. Actually, I owe gratitude to the Toronto rapper and producer Devontae, who uses it to refer to his crew, who are always working on excellence. It passed from him to fellow Canadian rapper Drake before I picked up on it. I use this term all the time and thank these men profusely. Writer, facilitator, coach, mentor, mediator, pleasure activist, sci-fi scholar, doula, healer, tarot reader, witch, cheerleader, singer, philosopher, queer, Black, multiracial, lover of life, living in Detroit. What a great intro. For this book, I am drawing most heavily on my facilitation, mediation, and coaching experiences. I have been facilitating social justice movement work formally since 2001, and before that, in high school and college, I did student organizing, in which I often found myself in what I later came to understand as the facilitation role. Inside of that work, I have been asked to mediate everything from organizational beef to breakups, and have coached people through personal and professional transformation along the way. I have supported environmental, food, reproductive, gender, economic, and other justice work over the years. At times, I worked formally in organizations that do harm reduction work with active drug users and sex workers, voter organizing at the national level, food justice work in Detroit, and nonviolent direct action training, primarily supporting Indigenous peoples and other communities directly impacted by climate crisis. I also supported the second U.S. Social Forum as a facilitator. I've held a variety of titles from assistant to coordinator to executive director. In each movement location, I felt inspired by how people came together for something greater than ourselves, and I felt a yearning for more. Throughout this path of my jobs, I was always facilitating within and beyond the organizations I served. At its most fundamental, facilitation is the art of making things easy, making it easier for humans to work together and get things done. There is a difference between simple and easy. Simple as in the relatively simple interactions of emergence. Easy as in facilitation is the art of making things easy. I don't think they are the same, and I have a hunch the difference might be important and that maybe it should be explicit. Simple means that it boils down to relationships between individual people, objects, beings, truth. Ease has more to do with the amount of friction or understanding between the people, objects, beings, truth. And part of what can clear a path to making things easier is to name the simple interactions at play in a complex system. Rachel Plattis. I think facilitation is rooted in a certain grand love for life. I've recently realized that I come from a family of facilitators, though everyone wouldn't describe themselves that way. As I mentioned, my parents are an interracial couple who fell in love in the Deep South in the mid-70s. I am sure I will write their love story one day, but for the purpose of this book, it's mostly important to know that both of them had to be able to see something impossible based on the families and societies they'd been born into, as not only a possible way forward, but as the best way forward. In their family work and community roles over the years, both my parents have shown a natural capacity for leading groups, organizing tasks, making things easier for those around them. They have navigated a wide range of political and economic differences in our extended family. I have two sisters, both of whom I look to as teachers and confidants. We are each very different, and yet we all seem to be oriented toward facilitation, consensus, and mediation work. In our lifetimes, being multiracial has become more common, but navigating other people's regressive, fearful, or exoticizing ideas about our identities is one of the ways each member of my immediate family grew this skill set of being able to see what's between, what connects the things that seem separate, the ever-present whole. I also have to speak here of my evangelical maternal grandfather, Fred Mathis, who facilitated many conversations about Jesus, morality, spirit, faith, and love in his lifetime. Every single time I was in his presence, I was amazed at how quickly we were in a conversation of his choosing, where he was really listening to my child thoughts about God and love and duty, where I felt I could be honest, even with my doubts, even with my heart. He often differed in opinion, which with him felt safe and even invited in a way that it wasn't and hasn't been with most other Southern white people. We would talk, and then he would get me on a horse and take me to the woods, asking me intermittently if I understood how powerful the horse was, how beautiful the land was. Though he was not a fan of my queer sexuality, the only letter I have from him includes scripture and sadness in response to my somewhat impetuous but accurate assertion that I like to sleep with everybody. He let me come back to his table, and before he left this plane, we created room to recognize each other's humanity and spirituality. I came to understand his fears were rooted in love for me and concern for my eternal soul. He came to understand I was going to find my own way, and that I loved him and was living a life he couldn't imagine. I learned from him the art of conversation, faith, and silence. My paternal grandmother, Eloise Brown, died when I was 9. One of my clearest secret memories is that I saw her, and possibly on a playground, shortly before I learned of her death. As I get older, I think part of her came to me to be carried for a while. I have felt her with me so closely. Most of her lessons have been passed down to me through stories about her, patched together with sparse, deep memories of her hands in my hair. Her door was always open. There was something to eat. The neighborhood kids knew they could come open her deep freezer for a popsicle. She had 7 children of her own. From her, I learned that food is an important foundation for community, and that love isn't always a doorway to forever. Sometimes it is a door to another love, always in an emergent process. Among other things, love is an energy of possibility, the possibility of wholeness in a platonic understanding. I come from a lineage of brave and radical love, and I don't think it is an accident that love has been such an overt and active force in my life, and that I have come to the conclusion that there is a science of love, a science of transformation and acceptance and gratitude that can help us to be better humans. So I will draw on that love experience as data as much as any other data presented in this book. Below are some of the other aspects of whom I am in this lineage and what shapes the content gathered here. Pleasure activist. I picked up this term from harm reductionist, footnote 26. Harm reduction is an approach to policy and care that reduces the harm that comes from drugs, alcohol, sex, and sex work, and other legal and illegal human behaviors. For a good introduction, visit harmreduction.org/about-us/principles of harm reduction. I picked up this term from harm reductionist Keith Sylar, who I met only briefly before he passed on April 5th, 2004, after 20 years of living with HIV. Initially, pleasure activism was about claiming our right to experience pleasure, to be safe and respected in the pleasures we choose. It has expanded for me over the years as I have come to believe that facts, guilt, and shame are limited motivations for creating change, even though those are the primary forces we use in our organizing work. I suspect that to really transform our society, we will need to make justice one of the most pleasurable experiences we can have. Footnote 17. DJ scholar Lene Denise, A Core Relationship and Learning Ground in My Life, speaks of this as misery resistance. She notices the practices, particularly in Black communities, of dancing, singing, and loving as forms of resisting and releasing oppression from the collective Black body. We also have to stop demonizing pleasure. We try to leverage control over the natural world by making our emotions and sensations less reliable than our thoughts, and then burn at the stake anyone who stays attuned to the ways and power of pleasure in the natural world. It's counterproductive. Audre Lorde says the uses of the erotic is foundational writing. Audre Lorde's essay, The Uses of the Erotic, is foundational writing on the radical act of tuning into pleasure and not settling for less than the erotic sense of wholeness and rightness in one's life. She is my ancestor in the lineage of this particular work and many others. I will speak many times of BOLD, the leadership development for Black organizers, that is one of my favorite political homes. What we do there is turn and face reality, engage in deep relationships, and love up on each other. It is an organizing space that is also a maroon space, and it is a pleasure to enter. Footnote 28. People are constantly creating what we call maroon spaces, free communities, free platforms for thought and expression. I think that that's just in the DNA of Black Atlantic culture. There's always the imperative toward the emancipated space. Greg Tate from an interview with Giovanni Russinello, April 30th, 2015, capitalbop.com/Greg Tate on burnt sugar, Afrofuturism, and the maroon spaces that music allows. Every member of BOLD is a teacher of mine. What we pay attention to grows. This is a hard world, but it is also a world full of love and pleasure. I am of that, attending to and growing that. That, to me, is pleasure activism. I am pretty certain that the next book I write will be on pleasure activism. And they did write that book. Healer doula. We all have the capacity to heal each other. Healer is a possibility in each of us. In my experience, healing happens when a place of trauma or pain is given full attention, really listened to. Healing is the resilience instinct in our bodies, a skill we unlearn as we are taught to pay for and rely on data and medicine outside of our own awareness to be well. I have been discovering or surrendering to my gifts as a healer. There is a way I can open up my presence, voice, and touch to an energy greater than what my body or life has given me. Then truth, comfort, ease, release, and other healing experiences can flow through. Wholeness and acceptance of what is can be felt. I have studied Reiki, massage, somatic bodywork, voice healing, tarot, and witchcraft as I have felt my healer capacity emerge. I place doula here because the work feels the same. A doula or birth supporter is specifically a person who supports a pregnant person before, during, and after childbirth. The role was traditionally held by women in the family or community, often working with a midwife or doctor in the process. Childbirth these days is one of the clearest examples of humans working against nature, hence the norms of sterile, medicated hospital births, with a drastic increase in scheduled inductions and unnecessary C-sections. I learned of these trends away from natural birth when my sister Autumn started having her babies, and she taught me a ton with her choices. I had been asked several times to be a doula and kept saying no because blood and the proximity of the words vagina and tear didn't feel like it was going to work for me. It's super fair. Then a woman was attacked with a hammer behind my apartment while I was living in Oakland, and I was the first to find her and comfort her as she bled and struggled to stay conscious. I saw her strength and aliveness and held it with her until the ambulance came. When she came to thank me a week later, we spoke of how we had created a future for her together. After that experience, and inspired by Autumn, I said yes the next time I was asked to become a doula, learning as an apprentice to Cynthia Jackson in Detroit. Footnote 29, Cynthia Jackson grew up in a home of natural birth and many siblings, and has been working as a doula as long as she can remember. She is now working as a home birth midwife and doula in Detroit. More information about her work can be found at sacredrosebirthingservices.com. Eventually, I got to be present for the birth of Autumn's third child and be part of her support during the miscarriage of her fourth child. Life and death are transitions that want to be held gently. I have now been a doula and birth supporter for several births. The final read-through of this book was actually delayed because a dear friend brought a perfect little one into the world, and I was her doula and could not look away from the first weeks of that precious being's life. Beyond birth, I have found doula to be a role that applies to many aspects of life. Birth work teaches us to engage tension, but not to indulge drama. It is another form of facilitation, making the miraculous experience of birth as easy as possible, intervening with any systems that make the process harder, helping the family attend to each other and listen to what the body is saying, staying focused on the possibility and wisdom of that body, standing or sitting with someone as they realize, remember their wholeness. That is the work of the healer and the doula. My healing work is just pushing back the external world, making more space for people to feel themselves. Detroit musician, spiritual teacher, friend Sterling Choles told me he considers himself a dressing room where people can try on their most authentic selves. And this has been a guiding visual for me as when I am engaged in my healing work. As he said in the opening of the 2016 Allied Media Conference, it's okay to feel beautiful in the process of creating justice. My mom says, writer, artist. My mom says writing came first, and it certainly has been the most consistent kind of work I have done in my life. Writing, creating, drawing, and singing. I am better at some forms of creating than others, but I enjoy all of it, and I have to write in some form every day. It's how I understand the world. Toni Cade Bambara, a Black feminist writer-organizer who left lots of wisdom for us, said two things that I turn to when I start to wonder if art is enough of a contribution. On one hand, as I referenced earlier, she said the role of the artist is to make the revolution irresistible. Footnote 30, interview by Kay Benetti in 1982. On the other hand, she said that writing is one of the ways I participate in transformation. From this wisdom combination, I see that I am charged to write about the revolutions I long for, and that any writing I do, even if it isn't explicitly political, is still a transformative act. I apply this to my songs, my self-portraits, my poems, understanding that when a Black, queer, thick artist woman intentionally takes up space, it creates a new world. Independent science, visionary fiction scholar. I read sci-fi and visionary fiction as a political, sacred, and philosophical text. I read, and I engage with others who read it that way. I spent the first part of my life learning what history's victors wanted to tell me to believe about the past, including the simple assumption that it was the past. I see massive patterns of violence and inequality in history which perpetuate in the daily news. Science fiction, particularly visionary fiction, is where I go when I need the medicine of possibility applied to the trauma of human behavior. While I have done deep dives in the work of Samuel Delany, Ursula Le Guin, and others, I started the scholarship in earnest with Octavia. She presented perspectives on the future that were terrifying and compelling, and she took my breath away with her ideas of how to navigate change. She said, "All that you touch, you change. All that you change, changes you. The only lasting truth is change. God is change." Footnote, Butler, Parable of the Sower. If we accept the scientific and science fictional premise that change is a constant condition of this universe, then it becomes important that we learn to be in right relationship with change. After much deliberation, I have opted not to include a bunch of Butler's analysis and spoilers in this book. Her work is incredibly strong and clear. If you haven't read it, feel free to put this book down and go read everything she wrote. Footnote, including Survivor, which was published by Doubleday in 1978, but never reprinted because Octavia didn't like it, calling it her Star Trek novel. I think it is a useful read to see her growth in idea formation. Okay, feel free to put this book down, go read everything she wrote, and then pick this back up. Warning, I reference her constantly and casually in these pages, as if you have also read the work and know what I'm talking about. That's true of almost everyone I reference. This book is not about analyzing other people's books or work. If you want more, go read the people and books I reference, and then consume the works they reference. I want to move forward from where others ended, or at least from the point of impact between their work and my own. So Wheatley, Boggs, Butler, my family, my passions, all of these are teachers of emergence for me. I have also been impressed and developed by the speeches of biomimicry teacher Janine Benyus, the mycelium mushroom scholar Paul Stamets, the organizing model of Ella Baker, the Toltec worldview presented in the Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz, the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu, particularly the interpretations of Stephen Mitchell and Le Guin. I have learned that feelings matter, that feeling is as important and legitimate. I have learned that feelings matter, that feeling is an important and a legitimate way of knowing. This learning has come most formally through somatics, particularly the social justice and somatics blend found in generative somatics, through the work of Stacey Haynes, Spenta Kandawala, Liu Huiman, Lisa Thomas Adeyemo, Chris Limbertos, Vasilisa Johri, and Richard Stotzi Heckler, and Robert Gass's work on the art of transformation, now developing and evolving into emergent strategies at the Social Transformation Project under the leadership of Jody Tonida, Eugene Kim, Idalise, Malave, and others. And Star Wars, The Force, William Gibson, Idoru, China Mieville, Dream Shit, Nalo Hopkinson, Sensual Breathtaking Magic, The Zapatista's many worlds exist. The Black Panthers meet the biological need of a community as a mode of organizing. Black feminist artists Audre Lorde, June Jordan, Lucille Clifton, and Toni Cade Bambara create as a form of revolution. Gloria Anzaldúa, and many more. Early on in my exploration of this kind of work, Marianne Manilov and Alyssa Hauser, network cultivators, invited me to hold a year of community practice with the Engage Network. They and the participants in the year-long journey were also teachers. Anasa Troutman, Carrie Kelly, Jenny Lee, Jody Tonita, Jane Sunyi Bai, Gilbran Rivera, Mike Norman, Jidan Kuhn, and Navina Khanna. Thank you. I also held a transformative phone-based community of practice for a year after a creative change gathering in Utah. It had some very vulnerable and beautiful emergent elements to it that taught me about curating soil that is fertile for relationship building. And then there are all the other people, the other incredible people whose voices are woven throughout this book and online appendix. They each taught me something about emergent strategy, and there are many more teachers whose voices are not in this book. I think that it is best that is the best I can do on explicit lineage. Feel free to remind me of anything I missed. Basically, I see emergence everywhere, and I feel positively obsessed with the possibilities of being awake to it. Without positive obsession, there is nothing at all. Octavia Butler, footnote 33, Butler, Parable of the Sower. Okay. Whew. Okay, I think I'll start next time with Principles of Emergent Strategy, and then we'll move into the next section of this book. Thank you for joining me. I'm really excited about this one. I love Adrienne Maree Brown's way of storytelling and the way they weave in references and personal experiences. It's been a delightful read. Thank you for bearing with my congestion and throat clearing and all of that, and poor name pronunciations, I'm sure. But regardless, I will see you again for the next section next time, sometime soon. Talk to you later. Bye.